Be advised, the opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
On this business portal for this edition. This is your host for this segment on Translation's TOTI CASIñO. Much of you, or probably some of you, have heard of this rebellion group called Huks, short for Hukbang Laban sa mga Hapon, or in English meant Forces Against the Japanese. This group were created during the time of World War II when the Filipinos that was suppressed against the occupation of the Japanese formed themselves together as a rebellion group challenging the imperial forces of the Japanese Imperial Army. Today, we have this guest from the University of Hawaii. She authored a book called Amazons
of the Huk Rebellion.
At the Huk Rebellion. And she's a graduate from the Ateneo, from a course on philosophy, and she took her master's in the States in history and also took her PhD in history. And we'd like to discuss more about the circle around this issue on the Huks and what lessons will be learned. We have our guest, none other than Dr. Vina Lanzona. Welcome to our show, Dr. Vina.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on this show.
Right. Quickly now, what got you to do this book? What's the background here?
Well, I was a graduate student. I told you that I finished my undergraduate at the Ateneo, and then from there, I worked for 2 years under Cory Aquino's government, actually.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, the Peace Commission.
You graduated in 89, so
89.
that was 3 years after
Aquino, during Aquino. So I was actually involved in the whole people power movement, you know, as a student at the Ateneo.
Yes.
And then we were all excited to work for Cory Aquino's government after that.
So when you were a freshman or sophomore, the snap election did occur.
Exactly.
All right.
So, and then but I was already very political at the Ateneo. In fact, my undergraduate organization there was called Lingap Bilanggo, and it's really for political detainees, you know, who were in prison during the martial law period. So we were extending assistance and advocacy for issues for political detainees.
So you were a sophomore when the snap election occurred.
Yes.
And then you were barely a sophomore in high school when Ninoy got shot. 83, August of 83.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, not bare. Well, I was yes, I was
But you weren't still aware about the political climate.
Well, I think I came from also high school, which is very politically.
Which one is this?
St. Teresa's College.
St. Teresa's College in Manila.
City.
In Quezon City.
Okay. Yeah, there was no more Manila, know, then.
Okay.
So and there was always about social consciousness. I mean, I always considered myself as a martial law baby.
Correct.
Baby, right? Growing up under martial law, and then but not really knowing the the whole. I wasn't really aware when martial law was going on, but we always had this cloud that we were under this martial rule, and we were under the very longish dictatorship, of authoritarian government.
Okay.
So in high school, and then eventually in college, in the Ateneo, I was very political, and I was part of the Lingap Bilanggo, as I said, and then Cory Aquino, as soon as she assumed power, she released all the political detainees, right?
Right.
And I remember that was a big moment in our organization.
Oh, okay.
So, and then after that, then I was very much part of another organization which dealt with the urban poor in Manila. So in Ateneo, as you know, as also as a graduate of the Ateneo, there's always this vision of social work and being man and women for others, right?
Okay.
So we've always been part of that. So I've always had this engagement with politics since college, and then I worked for the Peace Commission under Dr. Bengzon then, and Alfredo Bengzon, and it was really dealing with issues of also insurgency, especially in Muslim Mindanao.
Okay.
So we were part of that whole group which were trying to find out whether they want a referendum for separation and all that, or autonomy, right? So but that was straight from college after 2 years, and after that I thought that, and then in fact I was also part of the team negotiating the basis agreement during that period. But after that I thought that I really wanted to expand my horizons. I've been very much involved in these issues, but I wanted to study more
Okay.
and really specialize in, especially in history.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that I've never actually left the Philippines
Mm-hmm.
until I went to graduate school. So I
In?
thought in New York City at the
Okay.
New School for Social Research,
New School
which
for
is
Social-
also has a kind of very liberal,
Mhm.
curriculum.
Is
you
it really
know.
a new school?
Well, there's a long history of the New School.
Okay. It was founded when?
It was founded. I don't know exactly,
In
but
the
it was from Jewish intellectuals who were running away from Germany. So it
okay.
started as
It's
called
post-war. It's a
yes, it's
post-war
a post-war
created.
college. It's
Right.
called University in Exile when it started.
Okay.
So the really big Jewish intellectuals like Hannah Arendt and all
Yeah,
that, and
right,
the
right.
people from the Frankfurt School, they
Right,
went
right.
from Germany, and then they needed a haven and continue their intellectual activities, and they landed at the New
Okay.
School. So the New School has a very strong intellectual and leftist tradition.
Okay.
So that's why I went there.
Okay.
And it was also New York City. So
And what history did you?
I did
majored in?
historical. It's called MA in Historical Studies.
Okay.
So it's but then because I never really had a grounding in European history,
Mhm.
so that's when I thought that it would be a great opportunity for me to really study European history and to study intellectual history and to study social history. And I worked with one of the most prominent sociologists in the United States named Charles Tilly, and he's always been concerned with collective action and revolutions and social movements, and that's how I got drawn into studying our history of revolution in the
collective
Philippines.
action, real brief.
Yeah.
What does collective action mean?
Well, it's a group of people trying to make claim. The way we define it, social scientists is when a group of people come together and they
For a common
form
cause.
for a common cause or to make claims with the government.
Alright.
From the government, like
Okay.
they want to.
So that was evident in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole history of social
Okay,
movements.
going
and-
back to the French Revolution,
Yes,
dating
yes,
is from
yes.
the 18th century, then
Yes,
17th
exactly.
century. All right.
So there was a strong movement of
Okay.
this collective solidarity,
Mhm.
and then people not from the elite groups usually, and not from the government initiating all this movement, but really from the bottom up.
Yeah, from the grassroots.
From the grassroots.
All right.
So this is ordinary people, coming together and trying to form movements, and that's
Okay.
when I really got to be very much interested in studying revolutionary movements, social movements, and that's when I rediscovered the Huk Rebellion. Of course, the Huk Rebellion was something we've already taken up in Philippine history in college, but there was not really much about the Huk Rebellion that we discussed in college, right? So
in the Philippines.
In the Philippines, when I was a college.
Were you able to pick up some information in the States?
Well, I picked up, the way that you do graduate studies, you pick up all the skills of research, how to do research, how to do oral history, how to, formulate, your theoretical frameworks in formulating problems, and how to approach certain kinds of historical events,
Correct.
right? So as we all know, that history is not just collecting facts. It's really about interpreting,
Correct.
Facts. And how do you interpret? What tools do you use to interpret these facts?
Yes, you need to know the genre of that period.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
you need to know the form of government of that period,
Yes.
the state of
So
commerce and economy.
there's a political history,
Yes.
there's a social history. So
Right.
political history, you basically deal with all the major political groups and elites, But then social history is really looking at these historical events from the people, the ordinary people who usually don't have voices, and they usually are unnamed people, unrecognized people. They're not people we know, like the peasants and the working classes and the women, all those people.
So these are your framework.
So this
These
is
are
my
your
framework. And
all
then there's another framework, which is a framework of gender and women and women's studies and women's history. And really, by the time I went into grad school, women's history and women's studies was already very, very,
It's reaching its maturity.
And reaching its maturity, especially in the U.S.
Right.
And we're just beginning in the Philippines to really have, we have some pioneers in women's history,
Right,
but actually in college I didn't really have any women's
Okay,
history course
okay.
at all,
Okay.
So
moving on.
So moving on, so I have this interest in both revolution and gender, and then I rediscovered the Huk Rebellion, and the Huk Rebellion is one of the most important, peasant rebellions that we have in Philippine history.
Okay.
And it was also for me the first significant movement that actively recruited women to their movement. Yes. I mean, there were already women, as we know, in the Katipunan, right?
Yes.
But it's a very limited group.
During the Katipunan.
During the Katipunan, they were very involved, but they're mostly,
the nursing area.
The nursing and also the relatives, sisters and wives of the
Not to be in
Katipuneros.
arms.
Yes.
Okay.
But the Huk Rebellion, really was based, as we said, it was based in Central Luzon. It started as a movement against the Japanese.
Right.
But but Central Luzon has a very long history of social activism and lots of peasant movements. The Socialist Party was established in Central Luzon.
When?
Right.
Before the war?
Yeah, before the war in
Okay.
1932.
All right.
And it was by Pedro Abad Santos.
Okay.
The Partido Socialista ng Pilipinas was established in Central Luzon.
Aside from the Nacionalista Party that was created then, and the Liberal Party,
yes,
there's
the
already a
national,
Socialist
yes.
Party. Interesting.
And also, I mean, the Communist Party was, of course, established in Manila, in Tondo, because of the whole working class movement.
Yeah.
Right. So
This was just right after Soviet Union got into communism in 1919.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they merged. Our Communist Party and our Socialist Party merged in 1938.
Okay.
Before the war.
All right.
As a kind of united front against
Did
the
they have
incoming.
representation in the Commonwealth government?
Well, that was a very long history. At first, in the Commonwealth government, Quezon made this, President Quezon made the Communist Party as illegal organization. Illegal, right? Because that
Well,
we're
maybe
still
because-
under the U.S. and
Right,
communist
it was just-
movements.
yeah,
So
okay.
they were illegal organizations, and in fact, the leaders of the Communist Party, like Crisanto Evangelista and Pedro Abad Santos, they were all. Pedro Abad Santos, not Jose. His brother is Jose, but they were imprisoned, during the Commonwealth period.
Okay.
Right.
So now going back
And
to
then, but then, because of there was already the impending threat of Japanese occupation. That's when they actually Quezon released the leaders of the Communist Party. They merged in order to have this united front against the Japanese. Against the Japanese. But of course, the Japanese occupation happened, and as we know, the Quezon's government went into exile.
Right.
MacArthur left the Philippines
Yes,
and left his troops in the Philippines,
Right.
right? And that's when the armed group of the Huk Balahap, as you said, the Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, emerged as a guerrilla movement against the Japanese.
So before the Japanese occupied the Philippines, this group were anticipating that such invasion would occur and they need to organize. But were they armed during that time?
No, they were not armed. They
Okay.
only armed themselves really in 1942.
Okay.
So the Huk Balahap was established in March 1942. And
Okay.
as we all know, we were invaded by the Japanese in December 1941.
Correct.
Right?
So barely about 3 months after
3
the
months
invasion,
after,
they
yeah.
created, they
But
formalized.
it came from all the organizations that were already existing
within Central Luzon,
within Central Luzon and also Manila.
but
so
none
Manila.
in the Visayas and Mindanao.
Not in the Visayas and Mindanao.
Okay, okay.
As we know that there are probably other
There were separate group
there were
there.
separate groups
Okay,
there, but
okay.
this one was really focused on Central and Southern
And
Luzon
because Manila
and
was,
Manila was
the
center.
focal point of
Yes.
where we can get our independence from then, the colonizers, the Americans.
Yes,
right?
yes,
Okay.
exactly. So, but this was also, of course, the Americans also, they also had their own group, like
Yeah.
with the U.S. forces, they trained U.S. Filipino forces also in anticipation of the Japanese aggression, but they have what they call the United States Armed Forces of the Far East.
Right.
USAFE, which is separate from the Huks.
Okay, let's talk more about the hooks now, but you
Yes.
gotta pause for a break.
Okay, the
You're
Huks.
tuning in here on the Business Portal, and our guest here is the author of this book, The Amazons in the Huk Rebellion, Dr. Vina Lanzano. She is also sorry, Lanzona.
Lanzona, yeah.
And she's also a professor in the University of Hawaii. Do stay tuned for more information.
Thank you.
We're back here on the Biz Portal for the segment on Trends and Analysis, and our topic for today is the Amazons in the Huk Rebellion. You might be wondering why we're taking this subject matter. As you may very well know, the Philippines is always bereft with so many rebellion and activities, not only in the past but even the present, running almost about, what, 6 decades or 7 decades. And from here, maybe we could learn something from this book authored by our guest from the University of Hawaii. She's a Filipina, graduated from the Ateneo, and already took her master's and doctorate in the United States, none other than Dr. Vina Lanzona. So,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Vina,
Yes.
what have you learned about the hooks?
A lot.
Okay.
So as we said, in college we did talk a little bit about the Huk Rebellion, but we didn't really
Go in depth.
go into depth of
Because
really
there's no
what
much
happened.
account in history.
Yeah, I mean we have very few books on the Huk Rebellion.
Okay.
That's when I found out, like first how very few books we have on the Huk Rebellion, and then how a lot of it were written by the men who were involved in the Huk Rebellion. And the thing that I really found out was that how women were very much part of the rebellion, and in fact were very much central to the
Were they
inner workings.
ideologists, the women?
What?
Were they ideologists? I mean, they
No,
had... No, they're
no.
not.
I mean, many of them, just like, a lot of women started being recruited, especially during the war, right? During the war, when a lot of them felt really threatened, by the Japanese. And
the comfort women and the rape cases
yes,
and
they
atrocities of
knew
war.
about all those, brutality and the abuses of the
Yes.
Japanese. So a lot of them joined the Huk movement as a kind of for self-preservation to
Okay.
defend and protect themselves, right?
Okay.
But a lot of them were actually recruited by their own, men who either their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their cousins, because we all know how kinship networks, really
community
influence,
works. Okay.
influence our lives, especially in communities in places in the provinces like
Yes.
Central Luzon,
Yeah.
and when I mean Central Luzon, I meant places from Tarlac, Bulacan, Pampanga, Nueva
Bataan.
Ecija,
Yeah, Nueva Ecija.
all the way to Laguna,
Right,
Rizal,
right.
So it's all the way to
The
Southern
granary,
Luzon.
the central
Yeah,
granary.
yeah, the central granary, and all the everybody's kind of related to one another, either by kinship networks, really by blood,
So
or
it was the
by
men that carried the ideology.
the
And
men. A lot of the leaders, and not even a lot of the men themselves, because a lot of the men who became part of the movement, they were not really communist ideologues, right? They joined the movement, the socialist movement, because of a desire from some kind of justice, social justice in the agrarian system. As we
Okay.
said, that there was very uneven, most of them were share tenants or sharecroppers. So they were, they didn't really own their own land, right? So and there was a lot of abuse in the tenancy system, like for example, they go into the cycles of landlessness and indebtedness,
which is still current today.
which is still occurring
with the
today.
issue of Luisita.
Yeah,
All right,
so there's, they're really...
It is the landed and the landless.
Exactly.
All right,
They work on the land, but they don't reap the profits
So what
of the
happened
land.
then when the Japanese invaded
Yes.
the lands? The owners left the lands
A lot of them left the land.
and left it to their tenants,
Yes.
who watched over the land,
Yeah.
and at the same time they were defending themselves and their families.
Yes, I mean, I think what happened too was when the areas which became Huk controlled, they were able to defend them. They became immune to Japanese attacks,
Really?
because they
So
were...
the Japanese could not penetrate.
Many of those Huk areas became, impenetrable to the Japanese.
Really?
I mean, but then they'll all be constant attacks.
Of
They
course,
keep
of
on.
course.
But
So
there
with the-
also
right.
there was also a little kind of land reform that happened in those areas, because they started to redistribute land. They started to have a kind of social system,
Okay.
commune system going on, right?
right.
Because as you said, the landlords left, left, you know, and then they couldn't really take care of the land, but the peasants continued to take care of the lands, right? But at the same time,
and then who armed them?
Well, they armed themselves, you know, first by
attacking the barracks.
Yes, they're attacking the departing U.S. soldiers, you know, and the Philippine soldiers. So most of the U.S. and the Philippine soldiers had to, you know, when MacArthur declared Manila as open city, so they were left, you know, to fend for themselves, right? And then many of them were actually captured and had to go through the whole very, you know, the infamous death march, right?
Yes.
You know, but a lot of them, you know, continued to fight too, but then, you know, they were really not as organized as the Huks, and many of those, you know, those departing soldiers, they would leave behind their, you know, arms, and so the Huks will get those arms, and then they would also attack Japanese garrisons to arm themselves.
Correct. Now,
you know.
and with the women now.
And the women, yeah. So they were recruited like that first, you know, through kinship networks. But then once they're inside the movement, then they begin to realize, you know, what the movement is all about and what their involvement should be. So they have their own political education, you know, and then in fact sometimes they would call them the Stalin University, you know, in jest they'll say, because they will be trained sometimes in the communist dogma, but it's really more about you know, like about organization. And most of them, after their schooling, so many of the women will go through a kind of 1 or 2 week schooling, explaining what the Huk movement is all about, you know, and what they could continue, you know, how they could help the organization, right? And many of them really appealed, the Huk movement, the Huk Rebellion appealed to them because it's really a very nationalistic organization. It was founded against this new aggressor that we have, which is the Japanese. It's really to arm themselves and to, you know, to fight for independence against the Japanese. So this appealed to them more than communist ideology.
They were using guns. They were firing those guns. Were they
the women?
The women.
The women eventually would have, you know, some guns, but they're actually many of them
in the battlefront. Were they in the battlefront?
Yeah, some of them, you know. In fact, I have a whole chapter on the women commanders of the Huk movement in my book. You know, and I mean, this is not an actual commander. If you notice the cover of my book, this is Carmen Rosales from a movie called Guerrillera that came immediately after the war. It was in the movie was in 1946, produced by LVN, and it's a kind of movie about the women who were guerrillas during the war, which were a lot of them. But many of this, I have a chapter in this book which talked about women who became military commanders, and that they became, which is again very unusual for any kind of organization.
What was the major highlight that you noticed in doing this research?
Well, the major highlight that I really noticed about the research is first, you know, how women were recruited, you know, in terms of what really appealed to them, what were their motivations, you know, why did they join? And then after the war, as we know, the war finished, right? And then we had our independence finally in 1946. And then, but the rebellion continued. Right in 1946,
because the landlords got back, and then they tried to claim back their own haciendas, and
they illegalized all these movements that the Huks were part of. They made the Huks kind of, you know, as subversives. They became from war heroes to subversives and, you know, communist.
Yeah, and they were not rewarded
guerrillas
for saving the country from the foreign aggressors.
So many of them were, you know, and then there were a lot of, you know.
Did the women leave?
A lot of women went back, you know, home because they feel like, you know, we're not fighting the Japanese anymore. I don't want to be part of an organization that only, you know, fought against Filipino. But many of them, those who really stayed, really were committed to not just a change in the political system, right? Because now we are independent, we are run by Filipinos, but the social system was still the same.
Wasn't it more romantic for the women to join such rebellion during those days?
Well, there were a lot of romance in the movement, and in fact, that's what I focused to. You know, how the women, there was some kind of romance of a revolution, of, you know, like we all experience, you know, wanting to change the world, and they were very much part. And it's for them, it's also very much part of empowering themselves for the first time. You know, most peasant women, while they're involved in the domestic economies, they know that they're you know, I mean, they're involved in the agricultural economy for sure, but a lot of them don't really finish their education, right? Very limited education. They get married at very young age. You know, they have kids, and after having kids, then that becomes their focus. But for those women who became politically active, it gave them a new sense of purpose in their life, you know.
How did the society take that? Was society against those kind of women?
Well, it was very interesting because part of my research is looking through all the newspapers, you know, during that period, you know, and depicting, and in fact, the title itself, Amazons, was based from newspaper articles. Most newspaper articles called them Huk Amazons.
Huk Amazons.
Huk Amazons.
And when you associate the word Amazon, that refers to the Amazons in the South America.
Yeah, or Greek mythology.
The Greek mythology, that these are real women.
Yeah, these are real women who...
Mythical women or real women in the Amazons?
Oh, in the Greek mythology, mythical women. Yeah, but they're all just different, you know, like, you know, in South America, they'll say they're Amazons. But they're really just all women, you know, female unit.
Yeah, so they call them the Huk Amazons.
But they call them the Huk Amazons, and they appear in you know, almost every single day in the newspapers. Yeah, like they have headlines such as Huk Amazons captured, you know, Huk Amazons, you know, Amazon, you know, killed, or Amazon in encounter. So really that title was something based on popular, you know, culture at that time, you know, all the from the Philippines Free Press to the Manila Chronicle, Manila Times, they were all referred to as Amazons, Huk Amazons.
And they were flash and headline news.
So there's a lot of fascination that went with the capture, especially of an Amazon, because of this whole idea, how could women be out there in the fields fighting, right? So there's a lot of fascination, but there's also a lot of, you know, derision and mockery, and, you know, saying that women don't really belong in the, you know, in these situations, and these women are you know, they're kind of
they're only household subjects.
Yes, you know,
that's what women.
They're giving up their femininity. They're not real women.
So it was
you
taboo.
know. Yeah. So they're both.
Taboo.
It's interesting because the way that they were you know, like basically the way they're depicted in the newspapers were all, you know, in this kind of glorifying their unequal status in society, right? Being out there in this revolutionary movement, but at the same time, you know, mocking them for being unwomanlike, you know, and not being true Filipinas and being communists and all that. So
maybe that kind of publicity really affected them.
Well, I think it affected a little bit, and especially, I mean, one of the major arguments of my book is that, you know, despite the whole egalitarian, you know, principles that govern the Huk movement, you know, in terms of, you know, wanting land reform and equality for everyone, there's still a lot of, you know, really sexism and, you know, in the movement itself. And in fact, most of these women ended up being, you know, lovers of the Huk men in the movement, you know. So I have an entire, you know, chapter here talking about those sexual relations in the movement, because most of these women, when they joined, they were single young women.
Where were you able to get those accounts? I mean, where were you able
from the women themselves.
Did you interview these women?
Yes, yes. You know, the part of this whole book is really based, the central, you know, information from this book are based from the interviews that I conducted all over Central Luzon.
There is no particular character in this book, is there?
There are a lot of different characters.
Oh, different characters. Okay.
Yeah, I have here one who's been termed as the Joan of Arc of the Philippines when she was captured, because she was this, you know, beautiful military commander. Who was Commander Luay.
And was she burned in the stakes just like Joan of Arc?
No, but she was arrested, you know, but she was seen as the kind of Joan of Arc.
And then of course we have the equivalent of Florence Nightingale in the person of Tandang Soren. I don't know if they had that also.
Yeah, they have a lot of nurses and support staff, you know. I don't know if you've heard of this woman called Celia Mariana Pomeroy, and she was, you know, married to this this American guerrilla, you know, who was part of MacArthur's forces, who joined the Huks, named William Pomeroy. Okay. You know, and so she was the only woman who was the leader of the Politburo, or the political bureau, or the think tank of the organization.
Wasn't that made that husband rather uncomfortable to be associated with the left?
Which one? The American? No,
Yeah.
he was really a communist from the United
okay,
States.
okay,
But
okay.
he was, he went to he has
Join
a
the
whole
war.
story,
All
yeah.
right,
And he
okay.
actually wrote a lot of books. William Palmer wrote a lot of books about the Hooks. But so there were all these different characters, and I started my research in the early 90s. And I traced all these women, all over Central Luzon. So I
And you
actually
found-
really met them and interviewed them. In all, I interviewed more than 100 people.
Wow. And how long did it take?
Well, the entire
Yeah,
1.5 years of interview.
Oh, okay.
Because I wanted to go from different places.
Let's talk about the lessons that you've learned doing all these interviews, but we got to pause for a break.
Okay.
You're tuning in here on the Business Portal for this segment on Press Analysis. This is your host, TOTI Casino, and with us is the author of this book, The Amazons in the Huk Rebellion, none other than the professor from University of Hawaii, Dr. Vina Lansona. Do stay tuned for the concluding portion. We're here again on the Business Portal. This is your host for this segment on Trends Analysis, Toti Casino. And with us is the author of this book, The Amazons in the Huk Rebellion, a professor from the University of Hawaii, none other than Dr. Vina Lansona. So, Doctor, what lessons have you learned doing all these interviews with these Amazons?
Yes.
From 100 of them.
Yeah, a lot of lessons, really. I mean, first of all, as you said, that we need to learn from our history, and I think, as you said, we don't really learn enough from our history. We have decades and decades of insurgencies and revolutions, and then
We're doing the same mistakes over again.
we're still doing the same mistakes. We never really changed our social structures. I mean, all these women really joined the movement with the belief that there needs to be drastic changes in our system.
Is that an innate nature among women, Filipina, or globally universal?
I think
It's a
globally, I
it's
think
a universal phenomenon. Anybody who's oppressed tend to be
yes.
to join in a group.
Yes, and and sometimes there won't be any opportunities, that for them to do it. But
So we're no different from the French. We're no different from the Nicaraguans, or no different from the Vietnamese.
Yes,
Our women,
yes.
okay.
I think everybody we share all this universal, values of social justice and
Okay.
equality. We all want to have, to have a good life. Like
Correct.
to just enjoy the normal things people enjoy, like to just have, meals on your table every day, to have
Okay.
education for children, to have health care. I mean, and for all these women, it was the communist movement, at least, or the revolutionary movement that captured their imagination, who basically showed them that maybe we can have an alternative to the system that we already have.
Yeah, but did they knew that they were considered, they were become Amazons, or did that concept just brought to them by the media?
It's really a concept that brought to them by the media.
So they were really sincere about joining and empathizing with the cause.
Yes,
of the
they
movement.
were very sincere in empathizing with the cause. In fact, most of them really gave up their lives for the cause. Many of them, once the Huk Rebellion declined, had to stay, be in jail for more than 10 years. They were only really pardoned by Ferdinand Marcos in the 70s. A lot of the men, anyway. But the women, they were jailed for the cause. They, some of them might have, surrendered and gave up the cause, after years of struggle. But a lot of them really believed in the cause. And I think the Amazons, they both, the idea of being Amazons was also very good for female empowerment. And in fact, a lot of the the future feminist movements also were influenced or inspired by the women of the Huk Rebellion, like the Gabriela women and the Kabapa. They have this Katipunan ng Bagong Pilipina, which directly from the Huk movement. So all these women's movements and feminist movements, and I think that the Huk movement, the Huk women were very instrumental in actually opening up those opportunities, political opportunities for these women too, for all the Filipinas really, you know. But then what's really sad about after finishing this book and getting to know these women and knowing their sacrifices for our country and what they gave up, you know, a lot of them were separated from their children, you know, for years and years. A lot of them never really had a normal life, you know, after that. But really, you know, what has changed after their involvement. And I think that's what's so, you know, really what's so sad about the whole experience, because, you know, there's still a lot of, you know, many of the things that they fought for haven't really changed, you know, and we still have all this kind of social inequities in our agrarian system. You know, many of them died poor and nameless and unrecognized. You know, they were fighting during the war and after. But, you know, as I said in my launching last time, they all died without any, you know, I mean, many of them have passed on, obviously, and many of them died without any eulogies or no word, you know. They continued to become unrecognized, unnamed, and faceless, you know. And that's why I hope that with this book, you know, I could bring these women, you know, at the forefront of this movement and show, you know, what they've done, you know, not only for their communities in Central Luzon, not only for the women of the Philippines, but also for the Philippines, you know.
You launched this last week here in the Philippines. I understand that this was launched in the United States.
A year and a half ago.
A year and a half ago. What was the reception like?
In the United States?
Yes.
Well, in the United States, it's really an academic book. You know, as you said, I'm a professor, and you know, I had a really good response, you know, for the book. I mean, anybody who's read my book, you know, I've actually, you know, liked the book, which is amazing. So I thought I have a very good positive response, you know, from the book. And then, but really, the book would not have any, you know, for me, it has to come out in the Philippines, because this is really about the Philippines, and you know, I want the, you know, the Filipinos to read the book and to
among their interviews. I mean, it's very sad and pathetic. I mean, realizing that they served the country, but the country did not give them due respect. Were they, when you asked the question, if they were to live their lives again, would they regret that they chose to serve the Huk?
That's a very good question, and it's actually a question I ask every single woman I talked with, and almost universally, all of them would said they had no regrets.
They had no regrets.
No regrets.
Even though they were treated.
Even though they were treated
the way they were. The way
badly,
they were,
yes.
That they were badly, they were recognized, they were maligned, they were mocked.
Yeah, everything, and you know, and many of them, even in their personal lives, have suffered, because a lot of them actually had affairs with the Huk men who were actually already married, you know, before, because they were much older than them. But then they became, you know, in fact, there's a phenomenon called they became forest wives of these men, but then actually they continued to have relationships with the men even after the revolution. So, but then a lot of them never really got married in the traditional sense. You know, they got married, the movement. Many of them had children, but a lot of them had to give up their children during the rebellion. A lot of them got separated, and some women didn't even have a chance to even have children because they were so involved in the movement. You know, so they had a lot of personal sacrifices for this movement, and really because of this belief that, you know, we want to change the system, and the only way we could change the system is to be part in this organization. Because if we, as we all know, a lot of people are very frustrated with our political system, and who runs our political system? They're usually people who are landed, right? The landed elites, the political elites, and who really don't want to radically change our system in order to redistribute land, for example. I mean, land reform is something that's with us for a long time. Many different presidents have attempted at some kind of a land reform, and none of them are actually probably became successful, right? You know, all that. So about the land, you know, about education, you know, like everybody should have the right for education, and many of them really did not have that much education, and also with their children. So there's a lot of struggle that they, you know, had to endure. But then for them, having the connection with other Huk members and being part of an organization really was a very empowering experience for them, which really, that, you know, they would not want to. You
think it's too late for our government to give them due recognition, give them the honor? I mean, I mean, whoever these nameless heroes are, would that be too late?
Well, it's never too late for anything.
Yes.
In fact, and we all know this too closely in the U.S. The World War II veterans.
Correct.
They have this struggle.
Yeah.
The Filipino veterans have this struggle to be recognized.
Right.
By the U.S. government and be given pensions and all that. And it was only recently that actually finally they got recognized for their efforts of helping the United States.
Okay, you got only 1 more minute left.
Yeah. Okay.
What would you
So,
like?
but for the women, I think what I want is for their stories to be told, to be heard, and for them to really, even not a major national recognition, but really for people, historians or non-historians, to know that we have this very complex and complicated, very interesting history, and women were always part of that history. It's not always the men who have been running the place in the Philippines, and we all know that we've had 2 female presidents, right? So, but but the women, especially the poor, powerless, helpless women, are not really powerless and helpless. That in fact, in this very important part of our history, that they really tried to do something for themselves, and then they joined political organizations, they changed their society in their own way, and they've changed, they tried to change, or they had tried to envision a world or a Philippines that's, much better Philippines. And I think for that, we should recognize the Huk Amazons.
Okay, very well said.
So.
I hope next time your next book would be The Comfort Women. That is Dr. Vina Lanzona on her book, The Amazons in the Huk Rebellion. If I would recommend that you do get a copy in the regular bookstore. And unfortunately, we already ran out of time, and maybe learn something new. This has been your host for this segment of this business portal, the Trendless TOTI CASIño. And we hope you did enjoy on this edition a new subject matter that probably not everybody gets to see and hear and understand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Vina. It's been a pleasure having you on our show.
Thank you so much for